songs from our new hymn book, which I'm really starting to enjoy. Thank you, Dorothy, for introducing us to so many good new pieces from the new hymn book. And thank you, Stephen, for sharing. I really appreciated what you had to say, especially, I don't know if you're paying attention, but there's more than one way to read the Bible. Traditionally, I grew up reading it like this is the Word of God directly, no mistakes. But there's another way to read it, a way that I've adopted, so the same as Stephen has, which is this is people who have had experience with God sharing what their experience was with God. And we're free to disagree with their experience of God because we have our own experience with God. The Great Spirit teaches us all, and indeed Jesus said that. The Spirit will be your teacher, not this book. But this book is still a wonderful jumping off place to connect with the Creator. Where's my sermon? So thank you, Stephen. This sermon is entitled All My Relations, Thoughts on the Indigenous Situation in Canada. Has anyone here ever been to Banff, Jasper, Kananaskis? I think pretty much every hand has gone up. They're all beautiful places, you would agree. My family and I, Jack was there. We took the train to Jasper several years ago. Recently, the G7 met in Kananaskis, and I've attended a leadership retreat back in February in Kananaskis. I was soaking in the hot springs, and I did some cold plunges under the backdrop of the beautiful, majestic Rocky Mountains. And while these landscapes are stunning, as you will all agree who've been there, do we know the deeper history of these places? So let me tell you. In the 1880s, settlers and colonial forces arrived in that area of Alberta. They built railways, they started commercial logging, they started mining coal, extracting minerals. Rivers were altered for hydroelectric power. Grassland and ecosystems were changed for a whole different kind of livestock, cattle. And roads were built for industry and tourism. Provincial and national parks were established. Towns and cities were expanded. And of course, all of these changes were done in consultation with the existing Indigenous tribes and nations who had been living on and caring for the land for over 10,000 years. And the partnership between settlers and First Nations all went splendidly, just like Jesus would have wanted. Right? No, that's not what happened. We shake our heads because we all know the truth. White Christian settlers and the leaders of industry did the exact opposite. Indigenous communities were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands, confined to reserves that were less than ideal, limiting their ability to hunt and fish and live traditionally. Government policies like the Indian Act and the Gradual Civilization Act suppressed Indigenous languages, customs, and identities. Ceremonies like the potlatch were outlawed, and traditional dress and dances were banned. Missionaries partnered with the government to forcibly convert Indigenous people to Christianity, with the United Church of Canada among the complicit. Indigenous people were denied basic rights like voting, testifying in court, political participation, unless they renounced their status. Their children were taken to residential schools, forbidden to speak their languages or practice their cultures, and were often abused. Reserve lands were then further reduced, sometimes by over 90%, to make way for more settlers and more industry. Traditional hunting, fishing, and gathering grounds were closed, and Indigenous people were excluded from the benefits of all of this new economic activity. Diseases like smallpox and the introduction of alcohol devastated communities. Traditional leadership structures were replaced by government-imposed systems. Even after being forced out of the Banff, Jasper, and Kananaskis areas, Indigenous peoples were banned from even ever returning to these sacred mountains and these hot springs for their traditional worship practices. And all of these truly disastrous changes are maybe something we should ponder next time we're soaking in the hot springs at Kananaskis, Banff, or Jasper. Here's some of the names of the nations who were the victims of these horrendous crimes. The Stoney Iyahe Nakota people, the Ktunaxa people, the Sutansa people, the Blackfoot people, including the Siksika, Kainai, and the Pekini, the Cree, as well as the Métis. My friend John Snow Jr., the son of Chief John Snow, which I'll be referring to momentarily, my friend, in an interview, put it this way: we were not allowed to pray at the mountains. We were not allowed to gather our harvesting medicines. We were not allowed to go to the healing waters of the hot springs. Those are our healing places, and the impacts were, and continue to be, devastating. Can you imagine losing our places of worship and being forced to change our faith? Some of us are from the Eastern European background, like myself, and there's echoes of this in our stories. My great-grandfather was murdered for his faith back in the USSR. My father, as a child, subsequently fled to Canada for religious freedom, only to find similar oppression here, except not for himself, but for the First Peoples. So I ask you, who's worse, the Stalinists of Russia or the Canadian governments of the past? Both inflicted great harm. In fact, human history is full of such cruelty. We could make a list, couldn't we, of people hurting others simply because they were different or for profit. And Jesus warned us about this, didn't he? He said the love of money is the root of all evil. As I said, in preparation for this sermon, I've been reading John Snow's book. These mountains are our sacred places, the story of the Stoney people, by Chief John Snow, who died in 2006 at the age of 73. John Snow Sr. was a Stoney Nakota chief and a United Church minister and an advocate for Indigenous rights. He served as chief for decades. He negotiated land claims, and he worked to improve his community's well-being. I know his daughter Gloria from seminary, and his son John Snow Jr. was in my graduating class. And I've met their brother Tony. Sometimes these three children of John Snow Sr. act as Indigenous consultants within the United Church of Canada, helping us as a denomination navigate the delicate process of decolonialization. I want to read one of Chief John Snow's most famous quote about the Banff, Jasper, and Kananaskis area that we all love to visit, and that his people, the Stoney Nakota people, were banned from visiting or worshiping at up until recently. This quote describes beautifully the core of Indigenous worship practices and beliefs, the same worship that our colonial forebears tried, often successfully, to stamp out. Here's the quote: "These mountains," referring to the Rocky Mountains, we call the Rocky Mountains, "these mountains are our temples, our sanctuaries, and our resting places. Our places of vision, a place of refuge, and a very special and holy place where the Great Spirit speaks with us. Therefore, these mountains are our sacred places. This whole valley is a great cathedral which the Great Spirit built for himself and his people." Chief John Snow attended the Morley Indian Residential School as a child, which was run by the United Church of Canada. His son John, my friend, told me that his father didn't consider himself a residential school victim, but a residential school escapee. Much later, Chief John Snow was instrumental in bringing together both Indigenous and Christian spiritual practices. He was not overcome with resentment, but instead he worked to try and bring us together. He actively worked to show that Christianity and Indigenous spirituality can and should and does coexist. John once told me that if the first missionaries back then had followed Stephen's advice, had simply taken the time to listen and to learn from his people, they would have discovered that the similarities between Indigenous beliefs and Christian beliefs far outweigh their differences. They could have figured out how to live together right from the get-go. His dad, Chief John Snow, certainly believed in the harmony between Christianity and Indigenous spirituality. Here's another lengthy quote from Chief John Snow. "The Christian church came to us as one of the first representatives of white man's culture. Its missionaries preached the gospel of peace and brotherhood, which we found congenial and complementary to our native beliefs. Because they came as men of God, we believed they spoke the truth. We believed they described the role of their religion truly. And we believed they interpreted the ways of the white man's government truly. And we believed the advice they gave us was true and just. Because we believed these things and then found them to be untrue, many of my people now question the church and its mission. I still see a need for the church in our native society, but a reformation is needed within the church. The mission of the church can achieve some of its original goals by studying Indigenous religion with an open mind. Our religion, the religion of the Great Island, they referred to all of North America as an island, often Turtle Island. Our religion is not contradictory to the teachings of the great rabbis of the Hebrews, the Old Testament prophets, nor is it in conflict with the great Christian teachers. Didn't Jesus say to the Pharisees, "Other sheep I have which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd." Snow continues, "Our Indigenous religion professes faith in one Creator and acknowledges the unity and harmony of the creation, the harmony of the whole environment, land, animals, birds, plant, and people. Our language, culture, and religion, which are native to this great island, have survived, even in the midst of persecution, discrimination, and injustice by immigrants who do not understand our philosophy of living in harmony with nature." That's key. That's their worldview, their philosophy of living in harmony with nature and in accordance with the plan of the Great Spirit. Our history, he continues, is a record of our experience and relationship to the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, the elements, the seasons, the winds, the water, the fire, and the weather, because they are all connected to each other and to us in our oral history. The elders know and talk about other forms of life, sentient beings and sacred beings that dwell among us and journey with us in our human and spiritual travels in life. Snow continues, "One elder told me that he went to the mountains to visit the spirits there. Another told me that eagles possess spiritual powers that have helped our people over the centuries, similar to Stephen's story about the whale. The elders' stories relate to the surrounding environment and to nature's setting. The characters in our story are alive, and we can identify with them. Whether they are animals, or birds or rocks. Indigenous people have a kinship relationship to Mother Earth and the whole of the cosmos. And the last quote from Chief John Snow is this: all creation has spiritual meaning in our Indigenous worldview. I'm going to wrap this up now. I'm going to wrap it up with a challenge to think about what is your worldview. First Nations people believed of worldview as simply how you view the world. What are your values? What guides you as you make decisions day to day? First Nation people believed in the oneness of all creation and in a generous spirit that gives life meaning. My father's worldview, shaped by his Mennonite upbringing in Ukraine, was faith, pacifism, community, hard work, self-sufficiency, and keeping oneself untainted by greed. The typical secular North American worldview, to which unfortunately I am soaked through and through with, is shaped by consumer capitalism, where meaning comes from not nature, not community, but meaning comes from buying and consuming goods and experiences. This third worldview, the consumerist one, is the most prevalent and the least meaningful. So let us examine our lives. What can we learn from our Indigenous friends and their worldview? How can we use this awareness to make things better for them and for us? I guess I didn't tell you the truth. I do have one more quote from Chief John Snow. I'm going to give him the final word. In this quote, he refers to God by God's Stoney Nakoda name, Wakataga. Here it is. Wakataga, the Great Spirit, the Creator, made this land for all his people. He created the earth and the grass. He arranged the seasons to give growth to humankind and animals and plants. We can be a part of this natural rhythm and can even assist in making the harvest more plentiful by our work and our wisdom. To which I ask, will we? Thus ends today's lesson. Thanks be to Wakanaga. At this point, I will invite the ushers to come forward